Good evening, everyone. My name is Gaurav, and I help and serve at the center here in Pune. It's nice to see all of you here today. I want to start with our topic today. I've chosen an interesting topic for the satsang this evening. The topic is overcoming the ego. And it's a very fascinating topic. I often think about it, and I would love sharing with you this evening about this topic. And I want to start by reading from the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Ananda. And I just want to see how many people have read this book. If we can just have a show of hands. Wonderful. So most of you have read this book. So I want to start by reading a story from a chapter in this book. And this is an incident that takes place at the Kumbh Mela between Lahiri Mahashaya and his guru, Mahavatar Babaji. And the story is very poignant and very instructive, but very deep. And I want to bring out something from this story. And so I'd like to start by reading the story to all of you. The scene, this is Lahiri Mahashaya talking to his disciples. The scene was a Kumbh Mela at Allahabad. Lahiri Mahashaya told his disciples, I had gone there during a short vacation from my office duties. As I wandered amidst the throng of monks and sadhus who had come from great distances to attend the holy festival, I noticed an ash-smeared ascetic who was holding a begging bowl. The thought arose in my mind that the man was hypocritical, wearing the outward symbols of renunciation without a corresponding inward grace. No sooner had I passed the ascetic than my astounded eye fell on Babaji. He was kneeling in front of a matted haired anchorite. Guruji, I hastened to his side. Sir, what are you doing here? I am washing the feet of this renunciate, and then I shall clean his cooking utensils. Babaji smiled at me like a little child. I knew he was intimating that he wanted me to criticize no one, but to see the Lord as residing equally in all body temples, whether of superior or inferior men. The great Guru added, by serving wise and ignorant sadhus, I am learning the greatest of virtues, pleasing to God above all others, humility. What is humility? I was listening to a talk of Swami Kriyananji some time back, and he says, why did Babaji say that humility is the quality pleasing to God above all others? It seems a little strange. I mean, it's a good quality certainly, but I was thinking, okay, what is it in to be humble? Why is that way up there? And Swamiji says, humility, true humility means self-forgetfulness. And a beautiful definition. That true humility, in true humility, we forget the little self. And he says there's a difference between self-forgetfulness and self-abasement, which many people think is what humility is, putting ourselves down. You know, so somebody comes up to me and says, oh Gaurav, what a beautiful painting you've painted. And you know, I might know, yeah, it was a pretty decent painting I painted, but in the name of humility, I'll say, oh no, that's a terrible painting. You know, but Swamiji says that is not true humility. In fact, that is in a way demeaning that person's good taste. He's complimenting you and you're saying, oh no, you don't have good taste. So it puts a very funny angle to that. But he says that true humility is to give the credit for whatever has been done to where it truly belongs. And he says that the right approach would be to take that compliment from whoever is giving you that compliment, but then not to let it touch you personally, but to give it to God. And you just say, give it to God and say, good or bad, you did it. And many people say, why give it to God? Many people say, the scriptures say, the yogis say, realize that God is the doer. And for the longest time, I could not make head or tail of that. Because when we are in normal consciousness, we think, I thought, well, clearly I am the doer. I wash my dishes, I go to bed, I do my work. Where is God in the picture? But the yogis say that we have this ego, and this is the hypnosis of this ego and this sense of I that tells us that we have this separate existence and that it is true. So Swamiji says, people compliment you, give it to God. They say something negative, give it to God. And a good analogy here would be, which I was thinking, how do we communicate that? And I was thinking, let's say Sachin makes 100 and he wins a match for India. So he's sitting at home and he's gone out now to celebrate with his friends. So one of his friends calls him up at home, to congratulate him, to compliment him. But his servant picks up the phone, the servant takes the call. But the friend says, oh, okay, Sachin is not here, he nevertheless congratulates him, gives his wishes, his compliments, says, what a match it was, we won the match, just thank you. What does the servant do? Does the servant say, or does he feel proud of himself? No. Does he start complimenting, congratulating himself? No, because that is not where the credit belongs. It belongs to Sachin. So what the servant does is, when Sachin comes home, he's taken that compliment on behalf of his master, but when Sachin comes, he gives it to Sachin, where that credit belongs. And such is the case with us. That if we let anything touch us, then it will bind us. And why is that? The ego, so yogis tell us, the sense of I, is the root cause of all our problems, of all our pains, of all our worries, all our troubles, all our betrayals, and all our disappointments. And why is that so? We were singing this chant earlier, I have made thee pole star of my life. And we are trying to aspire towards that, to make God the pole star of our life. But when we are with these egos, we are stuck with these egos, and this ego is the pole star of our life. So what happens? Anything that happens to us in life, whatever comes our way, problems, troubles, challenges, rebukes, disappointments, it all ties to that I, It all refers back to that pole star of I. And that is very painful. Of course it's painful. It's very limiting. And that is why we suffer. But the more we can dissolve that sense of I and say not I, but you. And that is why the scriptures say, realize that God is the doer. The more we can say, I don't exist, that you exist. And you are doing this through me. Then nothing can touch us inwardly. And in that state, the things and the karma that comes to us will still come. It is not as if everything will certainly fall off. The karma will still come, but it can't touch you. That is the beauty. Even masters, when they incarnate, they take on some karma, but it doesn't touch them. Swamiji used to say Jesus didn't suffer on the cross like people think he did, because he was in bliss. He had absolute consciousness. And there's a beautiful story to illustrate this point, again in the autobiography of a yogi, where in the beginning, when Yogananji and his friend, if you remember, they flee from home to go to the Himalayas. And they reach till Rishikesh, and what happens there? The police catches them. And they take him to jail, waiting for their brother to come. And the policeman says, I met a sadhu along the banks of the Ganges. Our orders were to find a murderer who was pretending to be a sadhu and to catch him, dead or alive. So he says, I and my friend were looking for this murderer. And he said, along the banks of the Ganges, we saw this sadhu, this man dressed up in the garb of a sadhu, who was walking, and we shouted to him, stop! Because we thought this was our murderer. But the man wouldn't stop, and he had a swift pace and he continued walking. And despite repeated calls, the man would not stop. And finally, this policeman, in an exaggerated way, picks up his axe and almost severs the sadhu's arm. And what happens? The man still doesn't stop. He doesn't make any comment. He takes his arm and he puts it back. And then this policeman realizes that this is not the man they are looking for. And he just begs pardon from him. And what does the saint say? A very interesting comment. He says, "Son, do not worry. This was an understandable mistake on your part." How many people do that? Your arm has been chopped off, and you have the calmness to say, "Son, don't worry. This was an understandable mistake." How many of us do that? How was the saint able to do that? There is also a beautiful story Swami Ananda tells of a sadhu, of a Naga sadhu, who doesn't wear any clothes or very little clothes. And this man with long hair, obviously strange looking fellow, was walking through a village one time, trying to get to his forest ashram. And some children see this sadhu. And they obviously see this is a strange looking man, they can't relate to him. So they start laughing and teasing him and making fun at him. And the sadhu keeps walking. And then soon enough, the children, in their playful mood, they start picking up rocks from the floor and start throwing them at the strange looking sadhu. And they give him a fair share of that. So when the sadhu reaches his forest ashram, his disciples come out and they see him and they say, "Master, what happened?" Because his back was bleeding with all the stones that the children had thrown at him. And what did the sadhu say? The sadhu was oblivious of this fact. He said, "Oh, what fun we had today. The children were there and I was walking through the village and they were laughing and were so happy and they were throwing stones. We were throwing stones. It was such a wonderful day." That was what that sadhu said. He had no sense of I then. He had no longer that ego to which any personal involvement was attached. And so when we can dissolve that ego, then nothing can touch us. And can we do that? These stories seem way up there, they certainly are, but how do we reach there? Absolutely we can reach there. One day we will reach there. But where do we start? We have to start where Patanjali says and gives the definition of yoga. He says, "Yogas chitta vritti nirodh." And there lies the essence of the entire path of yoga. It means yoga is the neutralization of the waves of feeling, of chitta. Yogananji said to illustrate this, and it is very helpful to understand this clearly, because if we can understand this point and this illustration, we will know how we can turn the tables on the ego. He says there are 4 aspects to our consciousness: the mind, the intellect, the ego, and the feeling. Mon, buddhi, ahankar, chitta. And he says to illustrate this, suppose the mind sees a horse for the first time. The mind doesn't define it, the mind just perceives it. The intellect, the buddhi, comes in and says, "This is a horse." The ego comes in and says, "This is my horse." Swamiji says, even at that point, you're not caught. He says, then the chitta comes in, the feeling, and it says, "How happy I am to see my horse." Or, "I am so happy that my horse beat your horse in the race." And Swamiji says, when that chitta, that feeling of likes and dislikes, gets a hold of you, then we are caught. But most people, most of us, don't have to encounter horses in our lives. So what is something more we can relate to? Last evening I was taking a walk in a secluded path just behind this area. And I was just walking, and usually there are no vehicles on the path, so people can enjoy the path and walk quietly. And all of a sudden, there was a loud honk behind me. And a bike just raced by, honked 10-15 times, there was nobody on the road, and just zoomed past me and went. And my first thought was, how dare he? Why is he honking at me? There's nobody on the road. I don't like this. And then immediately I caught myself and I said, let's see what's happening here. The mind perceives a sound. The intellect defines it as a loud sound. The ego says the sound is being directed at me. He's honking at me. And what does the feeling do? I don't like him honking at me. You see how that works? It's so simple, yet it's almost cunning the way this works. But if we can stop this process at the stage of the intellect itself, let's say, and don't get caught up into it, and don't personalize everything that comes to us by saying, why is this happening to me? Why is he honking at me? Why is he shouting at me? And even further, not to judge what is happening. Because of whatever comes to us, if we believe what the yogis say, it comes to us for a reason. But we can choose, we can decide whether we firstly take it personally or we let it go. So this is, Yogananji says, how this Maya works. But we have a free will to decide how it touches us. So what do? How do we control and calm this chitta? Firstly, yes, by not reacting. By controlling the reactive process. Because every time we react, what are we doing? We are letting that feeling get disturbed. And the more that feeling gets disturbed, the more we are out of tune with God. How will we feel calmness if our feelings are disturbed? How will we feel peace and love and joy? Because our feelings are constantly being churned. But then there are other ways. There are other ways of this path that we can use to dissolve this ego, this sense of I that is the cause of all the misery. And Swami Kriyananda makes it very, very clear that the purpose of the spiritual path is to get rid of the ego. It's as simple as that. There is nothing mysterious about the spiritual path, and nothing. It's very straightforward. And sometimes people make a big thing, oh, the spiritual path is about this and occult mysteries and this and that. He says, no, just get rid of the ego. The thought that you exist. He says that causes all your pain and all your suffering. So what are some ways we can overcome this ego? The first of all, of course, is meditation. Meditation is a great tool to overcome this ego. And how come? How do we use the technique of meditation to overcome this ego, to overcome this I? How do we do that? Every time we meditate, we touch something. We touch a stillness. It could be peace, it could be calmness, it could be joy, love, bliss. Every time we touch that, what do we feel? That is who I am. That is my reality. Even if it's a 5-minute meditation, when we touch that, we know that that is real. And for that 5 minutes, you can forget this reality that I am this body and this bundle of flesh and bones. And the first time I had a long meditation, I pushed myself to meditate a little longer. After a while, after 45 minutes, I opened my eyes and I was in no deep state or anything. I had just gone beyond the point where the body was restless. So the body was not moving. And the mind was, a little still. But just in that little stillness, I gently opened my eyes and I was sitting. So I looked down at the body and I said, I'm not this body. I'm looking at it, but I'm not in it. As long as it's moving, yes, we can say I am moving this body. But when we are so still, as Yogananji said, when we've dumped the body, we're not aware of it. And Swami Kriyananda says by repeated immersions in that God contact, it won't come overnight. But he says every time you touch that peace or that stillness in meditation, you will know that you are not this limited I. And he said until that joy, that love, that calmness, that peace will become second nature to you. And you will forget this body and this ego like those sadhus forgot the body. What is another way that we can go beyond the ego? We all know of service, of seva. And what is seva? What is service? Service is not something we do for the sake of doing it, for the sake of getting things done. Swami Ananda, in fact, in the New Path says that the purpose of service is simply to purify the heart. It is not to get the dishes cleaned, or the kids sent to school, or the work done. The purpose of service, if we approach it correctly, is just to purify the heart. And what does it mean to purify the heart? Anything in life that can get you away from the thought of I, this little self, will going to help you. And service does just that. Because service takes the compass of your mind away from the thought of you. And that is what Swamiji said is self-forgetfulness. If you can forget yourself in that service, then you've expanded your reality beyond this I, to you, and to all of us, that I am serving God in everybody. And also, service, many people, including me, we go through phases, and at one point I used to also question, what is service about? Why do I have to act? Well, Krishna says, you have to act. But service done in the right spirit can free us. And service to anything, any service that is unselfish, it could be unselfish service to our children. That is also going to help us progress. It's not only service defined in a certain way that's going to help us. Service to our spouse, if we do it in the right spirit, Yogananji and Swamiji said, that can uplift our consciousness. But most of all, we serve the Guru. Why? Because he wants nothing from us. And he knows. And so, when he doesn't want anything from us, that is the highest service we are doing him. But in that process, we are forgetting ourselves. And many people who come, sometimes they come and they say, I have this problem, I have this trouble, I'm going through this challenge, a lot of difficulties are coming. We occasionally say, serve. People go into depression, we say, serve. Why do we do that? Because they've reached a state where they've become so self-involved with themselves, which has resulted in problems for themselves. Because when you start, just the mind keeps going around yourself, then obviously it's a whirlpool again. You're going in your problems, what about me? How will I earn? How will I live? How will I eat? And that is self-involvement. But service, what does it do? It says, forget about me. And in that serving, we forget ourselves. I was also thinking yesterday, it struck me that the caste system in India is also a very beautiful guideline if we understand it correctly. And it's a guideline which defines how these progressions are made from all these lowest class to the highest class, and it is directly related to the degree of self-preoccupation. For example, the Shudra. The Shudra is the most self-preoccupied, isn't that true? The man with the Shudra consciousness, I mean. He's most preoccupied about himself, fulfilling his desires and pleasures. The next up, the Vaishya. He has that self-preoccupation, but he's risen now, one step up, and he's thinking, how can I make money? How can I, at least serve people, maybe for himself, for his family, but it's gone up. The Kshatriya goes one more level up, and his level of self-preoccupation also is decreasing now. He's willing to give himself up for his family, for his country. And the Brahmin, he doesn't want any self-preoccupation. He just wants to be absorbed in God. And so even the caste system is giving us that guidance, that the more you can get away from yourself, the more your consciousness will be elevated. We can do this through devotion. And Swamiji tells the story. Paramahansa Yogananda used to love this story. He would say that about Vyasa and Krishna, there's a beautiful story. That Vyasa was one day sleeping on the banks of the Jamuna. And Krishna was sleeping on the other side. Or he was there on the other side. He has his camp. And Krishna used to love cheese. Everybody knows that. And one day the gopis came running to Vyasa. And they said, Vyasa, Vyasa, we have this cheese for Krishna. And we want to go to him, but the Jamuna is in flood. Please help us. And Vyasa says, why do you always talk about Krishna? Why don't you ever come to me with cheese? He said, who will feed me? If you always keep on talking about feeding Krishna. And the gopis, could not make head or tail of this. He said, okay, he's a great disciple also of Krishna, but we don't know why he's talking like this. But he says, okay, give me some cheese, feed me some cheese and I'll think about it. So they say, oh, okay, there's no other way around this. So let's give this fellow some cheese, make him happy. So he takes some cheese, and by the time he's finished, he almost finishes all the cheese. And then he gets up, somehow staggers after eating all that cheese, and walks with the gopis to the banks of the Jamuna, and he says, "Oh river Jamuna, if I have not eaten a single bit, part up and divide." And the river parts up and divides. And the gopis cannot fathom what he's saying. They're like, he told a lie, but what's happening here? Anyways, they were happy the river had parted. They went through the river, called out to Krishna, Krishna, Krishna. And there was no response. And they called out again, Krishna. And finally they saw that Krishna was sleeping. And they called to him, Lord, we've got some cheese for you. And he says, oh, cheese. Oh no, not today. That fellow on the other side fed me too much already. Yogananji said, Vyasa, that great sage, all the while that he was eating that cheese, he just gave it all to Krishna. And Master says, that is how we get rid of the ego, by always thinking of God and giving everything up to God. And there are talks of him where he says, make God the doer, make him responsible, good or bad, make him responsible. Say, Lord, you did this through me. You eat through me, you watch through me, you talk through me. And then he says, when you live in that way, nothing can touch you. There's no taint of ego there then. Finally, there are all these ways, there are many more ways. There's the practice of prayer. When we pray, what are we doing? Yes, we want somebody else to be healed, but what are we doing really? We're getting rid of the thought of I, aren't we? We're not thinking of ourselves. We're expanding our identity to somebody who we're praying for. When we do visualizations, we are doing that. When we are doing affirmations, when we chant, when we repeat a chant, that is what we are doing. We're trying to expand our identity. But more than anything else, Yogananji and Swamiji used to say that love God. Because all other desires will be fulfilled in God. And they would say that our only job on the spiritual path is to remove ourselves out of the way. They say we don't have to acquire anything. We don't have to find anything. We just have to remove our little selves sufficiently enough out of the way, those little self-definitions, so that God can step in. And there is a beautiful story. I just love this story of Swami Kriyanandaji. When he was living in Yoganandaji's ashram in Mount Washington, it was a monsoon season and he was sitting at his desk and he was looking out his window where usually there's a beautiful view that he got. And because of the rain just beating continuously against the window, there was a lot of mud that had splattered on the window, with the result that he could not see outside. So he went out, and he just rubbed the window, cleaned it just very nicely. And then he went in and he sat at his desk again. And he says, what a view. Because now he could see that view. But then he says, what a beautiful window. And then immediately Swamiji replies, is it really the window that is beautiful? He says, you can't see the window now. It's so clean that when you can't see the window, then the view is beautiful. When the window has removed itself, then only you can see through it, isn't it? And he says that is how we must be in this world. That we must be windows for God. And the only thing we have to do is just remove the debris of our souls, remove those identities and definitions that say, I matter. Swamiji says you don't matter, you don't exist, only God exists. And so the only thing we have to do in this world is to just work at becoming purer channels. And that is how we get away from the ego. Ultimately, our only efforts should be to remove anything from our paths, from our lives, that prevent us from becoming everything.